You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't expose every single lie your family has built their fortune on. The words came out of my mouth with a calm I didn't know I possessed. 3 months ago, I would never have imagined myself standing in this marble-floored law office, watching my late husband's brother's face drain of all color. But grief has a way of teaching you things about yourself you never knew existed. My name is Margaret Moore, and this is the story of how I went from being the family joke who inherited $12 to the woman who holds the power to destroy them all. Right now, I'm watching Richard Pemberton, the man who called me worthless trailer trash at my own husband's funeral, literally shake as I hold a manila envelope that contains 30 years of his family's darkest secrets. But let me ask you something first. How are you doing today? Where are you watching from? I hope wherever you are, you're somewhere warm and safe, because this story is going to take you to some cold, dark places before we reach the light. The weather here in Oregon has been gray and drizzling, which feels fitting for what I'm about to tell you. You know, people always say that karma is real, that what goes around comes around. I used to think that was just something we told ourselves to feel better when life got unfair. I spent most of my adult life believing that good people got stepped on and bad people got ahead. I thought justice was just a word we used in courtrooms, not something that actually happened to real people like me. I was wrong about all of it. This is a story about how the universe sometimes takes its time, but it never forgets. It's about how the people who think they're untouchable often build their own destruction, one cruel word at a time. And it's about how sometimes the thing that looks like your greatest humiliation turns out to be your greatest gift. Before I tell you how I got here, I need you to do me a favor. If this story moves you, if it makes you think about the people in your own life who deserve justice, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over yet. And stick around until the end, because I promise you, the revelation that's coming will change how you think about family, money, and power forever. But let me start from the beginning, 3 months ago, when I was still naive enough to believe that family meant something. I was 28 when I married David Pemberton, and I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Not because of his money, though his family had plenty, but because he saw something in me that no one else ever had. I grew up in foster care, bounced between homes until I aged out at 18. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college, lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat, and genuinely believed that love was something that happened to other people. David changed all of that. He was different from his family in every way that mattered. Where they were cold, he was warm. Where they were calculating, he was generous. Where they saw dollar signs, he saw human beings. He used to tell me that marrying me was the first real decision he'd ever made, the first time he'd chosen his heart over his family's expectations. For 5 years, we built something beautiful together. We lived modestly by his family's standards, a small house on the outskirts of town, simple furniture, home-cooked meals instead of restaurant dinners. David said he wanted to earn his own way, to build something that was ours, not theirs. I supported him completely. I believed in us, in the life we were creating, in the family we planned to start. His relatives tolerated me at best. Richard, his older brother, made it clear from day one that he thought David had married beneath himself. "She's pretty enough," I once overheard him tell their mother, "but what happens when that fades? What's she bringing to the table besides a pretty face and a sob story?" Their mother, Eleanor, was more subtle but no less cutting. She had a way of asking questions that sounded caring but felt like knives. "Margaret, dear, are you still working at that little shop downtown? How quaint." Or, "David mentioned you're taking night classes. Still trying to better yourself, I see." But David shielded me from the worst of it. He'd squeeze my hand under the table during family dinners, whisper jokes in my ear to make me laugh when the conversation turned to trust funds and investment portfolios, things I knew nothing about. He made me feel like I belonged, like I was enough, like their opinions didn't matter because we had each other. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, David collapsed at work. Massive heart attack. He was 33 years old, healthy as far as we knew, no warning signs. The doctors said it was a genetic condition, something that could have been triggered by stress. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. The funeral was a nightmare. I sat in the front row of the church, wearing the only black dress I owned, while David's family filled the pews behind me. I could hear them whispering, could feel their eyes on me, could sense their judgment even in my grief. Richard gave a eulogy that barely mentioned me, talking about David's bright future and unrealized potential, as if I had somehow held him back. After the service, Eleanor approached me with what I thought was sympathy. "Margaret, dear," she said, taking my hands in her cold ones, "I know this is difficult, but we need to discuss practical matters. David's affairs, the house, his belongings. Perhaps it would be easier if you let us handle everything. You're so young, and these things can be complicated." I should have seen it then, should have recognized the predatory gleam in her eyes. But I was drowning in grief, barely able to function, let alone think clearly about legal matters. I nodded and agreed to let them help me through the process. That was my first mistake. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. I arrived at the law offices of Pemberton, Hayes and Associates. Yes, the family had their name on the building, wearing my best dress and clutching the small purse David had bought me for our last anniversary. The conference room was full of relatives I barely knew, all dressed in expensive black, all watching me with expressions that ranged from pity to barely concealed hostility. Richard sat at the head of the table like he was already in charge. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though I noticed the tears never quite materialized. David's cousins, aunts, and uncles filled the remaining chairs, leaving me isolated at the far end of the table like an afterthought. The lawyer, a thin man named Harrison Webb, cleared his throat and began reading. The will was extensive, full of legal language I didn't understand, but the basic structure became clear quickly. The family business, the investments, the properties, everything of real value was being distributed among the blood relatives. With each bequest, I felt myself shrinking smaller in my chair. David's brother received the controlling interest in Pemberton Industries. His mother got the family estate and the vacation home in Aspen. Cousins received trust funds and stock portfolios. Even distant relatives I'd never met were getting something substantial. And then Harrison Webb looked directly at me. "To my beloved wife, Margaret Moore Pemberton," he read, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room, "I leave the sum of $12. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Richard started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-throated laugh that echoed off the conference room walls. Eleanor's handkerchief dropped to the table as she joined in, her refined composure cracking to reveal something ugly underneath. Soon the entire room was laughing, pointing at me, whispering behind their hands. $12, Richard gasped between laughs. He left her $12. I guess that's what 5 years of marriage to a gold digger is worth. Well, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, at least now we know what David really thought of her. $12. How appropriate. The laughter got louder, crueler. Someone in the back of the room said, "That's more than she came with." Another voice added, "Maybe she can buy herself a nice lunch." I sat there, frozen, as the people who were supposed to be my family tore me apart. The grief I'd been carrying for the past week transformed into something else, a burning humiliation that made my cheeks flame and my hands shake. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to wake up from this nightmare. But more than anything, I wanted to understand. David loved me. I knew he loved me. We'd talked about the future, about children, about growing old together. Why would he leave me $12? It didn't make sense. It felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than his death, a final rejection that said maybe his family had been right about me all along. I stood up on unsteady legs, my chair scraping against the floor. The laughter died down as everyone turned to watch my humiliation. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense their satisfaction at seeing me put in what they considered my proper place. "I should go," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I made it halfway to the door before Harrison Webb's voice stopped me cold. "Mrs. Pemberton, please wait. I need you to come with me." I turned around slowly, confused by the lawyer's request. The laughter in the room had stopped completely, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Harrison Webb was standing now, his expression serious in a way that seemed different from the formal politeness he'd shown during the will reading. "Come with you where?" I asked, my voice still shaky from the humiliation. "There are additional matters we need to discuss privately," he said, gathering some papers from the table. "Please, it's important." Richard stood up abruptly, his chair sliding back. "Now wait just a minute, Webb. If there are additional matters concerning David's estate, the family has a right to know about them." Harrison's expression didn't change. "Mr. Pemberton, I'm following your brother's explicit instructions. Mrs. Pemberton, if you would please come with me." I looked around the room at all those faces, some curious, some annoyed, all of them still wearing traces of the cruel amusement they'd shown moments before. Eleanor was frowning, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. Richard looked like he wanted to object further, but couldn't quite find the legal grounds. "I don't understand," I said. "What other matters?" "I'll explain everything once we're in my car," Harrison said. "Please trust me." Trust. The word felt foreign after what I'd just experienced. But what choice did I have? I nodded and followed him out of the conference room, leaving behind a buzz of confused whispers and angry murmurs. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was silent. Harrison Webb seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't read. I kept replaying the will reading in my mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened. $12. The number felt like a slap, a final insult from the man I'd loved more than my own life. But as we walked toward his car, a modest sedan that seemed out of place in a garage full of luxury vehicles, I started thinking about David differently. The David I knew wouldn't have been cruel. He wouldn't have humiliated me in front of his family, wouldn't have reduced our 5 years together to $12. There had to be something else, something I was missing. "Mr. Webb," I said as he unlocked the car doors, "can you at least tell me where we're going?" He paused, his hand on the door handle. "Your husband left very specific instructions about what should happen after the will reading. He said you would understand once you saw what he wanted to show you." "But I don't understand anything," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "I don't understand why he left me $12. I don't understand why his family hates me so much, and I don't understand why you're being so mysterious about everything." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Pemberton, your husband was a very careful man. He loved you deeply, but he also knew his family better than you might think. Everything he did was designed to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From them," he said simply. "Please get in the car. You'll understand soon." The drive took us out of the city, through suburbs I'd never seen before, and eventually onto winding country roads lined with tall trees. I'd lived in this area my entire adult life, but I'd never been this far from town. The landscape was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, rolling hills covered in dense forest, occasional glimpses of mountains in the distance. As we drove, Harrison began to talk, and slowly, pieces of a puzzle I didn't know existed started falling into place. "I've been the Pemberton family lawyer for 15 years, he said, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "I handled David's personal affairs separately from the family business, at his request. He came to see me about 6 months before he died." "6 months?" I interrupted. "But he wasn't sick. The doctors said the heart attack was sudden, that there were no warning signs." "He wasn't sick," Harrison agreed. "But he was worried. He'd been having some chest pains, nothing serious according to his doctor, but it made him think about mortality. More importantly, it made him think about what would happen to you if something happened to him." I stared out the window at the passing trees, trying to process this information. David had been worried about dying and hadn't told me? We shared everything, or at least I thought we did. "He knew his family would try to cut you out completely if they could," Harrison continued. "He'd seen how they treated you at family gatherings, heard the things they said when they thought he wasn't listening. Richard had been pressuring him for years to sign a prenuptial agreement, to protect the family assets as he put it. David never mentioned any of that to me. He didn't want to worry you. But he also didn't want to leave you vulnerable. So he came up with a plan. We turned onto an even smaller road, barely more than a dirt path winding through the forest. I was starting to feel nervous about how isolated we were getting, how far from civilization we'd traveled. "What kind of plan?" I asked. Harrison smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "A brilliant one, actually. David knew that if he left you a substantial inheritance in the traditional way, his family would find ways to challenge it. They'd claim you manipulated him, that he wasn't in his right mind, that you were a gold digger who didn't deserve anything. They have expensive lawyers and unlimited resources. They could have tied up his estate in court for years. So instead, he left me $12 and humiliated me in front of everyone? He left you $12 because 12 was your anniversary date. December 12th. The day you met at that coffee shop downtown. The day he said his real life began." I felt my breath catch in my throat. December 12th. Of course. We celebrated that date every year, called it our beginning day. David used to joke that it was more important than our wedding anniversary because it was when he first knew he wanted to spend his life with me. "But I still don't understand," I said. "What does that have to do with protecting me?" "The $12 wasn't your inheritance," Harrison said as we pulled into a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. "It was a key." In the center of the clearing sat a cottage that looked like something from a fairy tale. It was small but perfectly maintained, with a stone chimney, flower boxes under the windows, and a red door that seemed to glow against the dark wood siding. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and warm light spilled from the windows into the gathering dusk. "David bought this property 2 years ago," Harrison said as we got out of the car. He told his family he was making a small investment in rural real estate, nothing significant. They barely paid attention because the purchase price was so low, the land was considered worthless, too remote for development. I followed him up a stone path toward the cottage, my mind reeling. David owned this place? He never told me about it. He was planning to surprise you for your 5th anniversary. He'd been working on it every weekend when he told you he was playing golf with clients. He wanted to create a place where you could escape from his family's judgment, where you could just be yourselves. Harrison pulled out a key and unlocked the red door. The interior was even more magical than the outside, exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace with a fire already crackling, comfortable furniture that looked handmade, and everywhere I looked, touches that were purely David. His favorite books on the shelves, photographs of us that I'd never seen before, even the throw blanket from our first apartment draped over the couch. "How is there a fire burning?" I asked, still trying to process everything. "I've been maintaining the property according to David's instructions," Harrison said. He left very detailed plans for what should happen if something happened to him. The cottage was to be prepared and ready for you. I walked slowly through the rooms, touching things that David had chosen, seeing our life together reflected in ways I'd never imagined. In the bedroom, I found a letter on the nightstand with my name written in David's familiar handwriting. "Go ahead," Harrison said gently. "Read it." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. David's voice seemed to speak directly to me through his words. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true and I'm no longer with you. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry for leaving you, and I'm sorry for the pain my family has undoubtedly caused you today. By now you know about the $12, and I hope Harrison has explained why. I couldn't risk leaving you a traditional inheritance because I know my family would have destroyed you trying to take it away. But this cottage, this land, this is truly yours. It's in your name only, purchased with money I earned independently from the family business. But Margaret, this cottage is more than just a place to live. It's the key to everything. In the basement, behind the bookshelf, you'll find a safe. The combination is our beginning day, 1212. Inside that safe is the real inheritance I'm leaving you and the power to protect yourself from my family forever. I love you more than words can express. You made me a better man, a happier man, a man who knew what it meant to be truly loved. Don't let them convince you otherwise. You were never the problem, my darling. You were always the solution." I was crying by the time I finished reading, But they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of recognition, of understanding, of a love so deep and protective that it had reached beyond death to take care of me. "There's more, isn't there?" I asked Harrison, looking up from the letter. He nodded. "Much more. But first, you should know that your husband's family is probably very worried right now. They're wondering where you went, what other surprises David might have left behind. Richard has already called my office 3 times. Let them worry," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Show me what's in the safe." The basement of the cottage was nothing like I expected. Instead of a dark, cramped space, it was a fully finished room with proper lighting, comfortable seating, and walls lined with built-in bookshelves. But it was what was behind those bookshelves that changed everything. Harrison showed me how to pull on a specific book, a copy of The Great Gatsby that David had given me on our first anniversary, and an entire section of the bookshelf swung inward like a door. Behind it was a wall safe, its digital display glowing softly in the dim light. 1212, I whispered, entering our beginning date into the keypad. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of documents, several USB drives, and what looked like years' worth of financial records. Harrison reached in and pulled out a thick folder marked with my name. "Your husband spent 2 years documenting everything," he said, handing me the folder. "Every conversation, every business deal, every family secret that could be used against you." He knew that knowledge would be your only real protection. I opened the folder and immediately understood why David had been so secretive, so careful, so protective. The first document was a financial analysis showing that Pemberton Industries had been systematically defrauding their investors for over a decade. The second was a recording transcript of Richard discussing bribing city officials to secure construction contracts. The third was evidence that Eleanor had been embezzling from the family's charitable foundation. I started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the implications. "Enough to destroy them completely," Harrison finished. "Your husband discovered all of this by accident when Richard tried to pressure him into signing fraudulent documents. Instead of confronting them directly, David decided to gather evidence. He knew they would never change, but he also knew they would eventually come after you." I kept reading, each document more damaging than the last. Tax evasion, money laundering, fraud, bribery. The Pemberton family fortune was built on a foundation of criminal activity that went back decades. David had documented everything meticulously, including his own refusal to participate and their threats against him when he wouldn't cooperate. "They threatened him?" I asked, looking up at Harrison. "Multiple times. Richard told him that if he didn't play along, they would make sure you suffered for it. They threatened to have you fired from your job, to spread rumors about you around town, to make your life so miserable that you would leave him voluntarily." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that made my stomach turn. David's stress in the months before he died, the way he'd been working longer hours, the phone calls he'd taken private, he hadn't been pulling away from me. He'd been protecting me from a war I didn't even know was being fought. "There's something else," Harrison said, reaching back into the safe. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked, "For Margaret, open only if they try to take everything." "What's in it?" "I don't know. David sealed it himself and told me it was your nuclear option, something that would end the fight permanently, but that you should only use if they pushed you too far." I held the envelope, feeling its weight. Whatever was inside felt like it could change everything, but David's warning was clear. This was meant to be a last resort. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" I asked, gesturing at the documents spread across the table. "That's entirely up to you," Harrison said. "David's instructions were to show you everything and then let you decide. You could use this information to negotiate with his family, to ensure they leave you alone and provide you with a reasonable settlement. Or you could take it to the authorities and watch their entire empire crumble. Or you could do nothing. You could take the cottage, disappear from their lives completely, and let them think they won. This place is yours free and clear, and David left enough money in a separate account to maintain it for years." I walked around the basement, trying to process everything I'd learned. 3 hours ago, I'd been the humiliated widow who inherited $12. Now I was sitting on enough evidence to destroy one of the most powerful families in the state. The transformation was so complete, so overwhelming, that I felt like I was living in someone else's life. They really hate me that much? I asked. Enough to threaten David, to try to destroy me? It's not personal hatred, Harrison said. It's fear. You represent everything they're not: genuine, honest, loving. David changed when he met you, became someone who questioned their values, their methods, their entire way of life. They saw you as a threat to their control over him. And now? Now they think they've won. They think you'll disappear quietly, maybe move away, maybe remarry someone more appropriate to your station. They have no idea what David really left you. I picked up one of the USB drives, turning it over in my hands. What's on these? Audio recordings, mostly. David started wearing a wire to family meetings after they threatened you. He recorded everything: business discussions, personal conversations, planning sessions for illegal activities. Some of it is damning enough to put them in prison. The weight of responsibility was crushing. I held the power to destroy people, to ruin lives, to tear apart a family that had been powerful for generations. But I also held the power to protect myself, to ensure that David's sacrifice meant something, to make sure that no one else would ever be treated the way they'd treated me. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course. The cottage is yours for as long as you need it. There's food in the kitchen, firewood for the fireplace, everything you need to be comfortable. Take all the time you want. Harrison gathered up the documents and put them back in the safe, but he left the folder with my name on it and the sealed envelope on the table. One more thing, he said as we walked back upstairs. David left you a letter for every major decision you might face. There's one if you decide to negotiate with the family, one if you decide to go to the authorities, and one if you decide to disappear completely. They're all in the safe, marked clearly. He thought of everything, didn't he? He loved you more than his own life, Harrison said simply. Everything he did was about protecting you and giving you choices. He never wanted you to feel trapped or powerless. After Harrison left, I sat alone in the cottage that David had created for me, surrounded by evidence of a love so deep and protective that it had anticipated every possible threat to my future. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and for the first time since David's death, I felt truly safe. But I also felt something else, a burning anger at the people who had made such elaborate protection necessary. They had threatened the man I loved, humiliated me at his funeral, laughed at me during the will reading, and spent years trying to make me feel worthless and unwanted. I picked up the sealed envelope marked "Nuclear Option" and held it up to the light, trying to see what was inside. David had trusted me to make the right decision, to know when enough was enough, to understand when the time for mercy had passed. As I sat there in the cottage David had built for our future, surrounded by evidence of his family's crimes, I realized that the scared, humiliated woman who had left that conference room no longer existed. In her place was someone new, someone who understood that sometimes love meant fighting back, that sometimes protection meant going to war. The question was no longer whether I would use David's gift to me. The question was how completely I was willing to destroy the people who had destroyed him. I opened the folder with my name on it and began to read more carefully, taking notes, planning my next move. By the time the fire burned down to embers, I had made my decision. The Pemberton family had no idea what was coming for them. But they were about to find out. I spent 3 days at the cottage, reading every document, listening to every recording, and slowly understanding the full scope of what David had uncovered. The Pemberton family wasn't just wealthy. They were criminals who had been operating with impunity for decades, protected by their reputation and their ability to buy silence. But it was the personal recordings that cut the deepest. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, headphones on, listening to David's voice from beyond the grave as he secretly recorded a family dinner from 6 months before his death. My hands shook as I heard Eleanor's voice, crystal clear through the recording device David had hidden in his jacket pocket. "The girl is becoming a problem, David. She's making you soft, making you question decisions that aren't hers to question. Margaret is my wife, Mother. She's not the girl, and she's not a problem. Isn't she? Richard's voice joined the conversation. You've been resistant to every business proposal we've brought you this year. You're asking questions about things that have never concerned you before. You're acting like you don't trust your own family. Maybe I'm just growing up, David replied, and I could hear the tension in his voice. Maybe I'm starting to think for myself instead of just following orders. Or maybe, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to that dangerous tone I knew so well, your wife is filling your head with ideas about morality and ethics that have no place in business. She comes from nothing, David. She doesn't understand how real wealth is built and maintained. Real wealth? David's voice was getting sharper. You mean fraud? Money laundering? Bribing city officials? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Richard spoke, his voice cold and threatening. Be very careful, little brother. Be very careful about the accusations you make and the loyalties you question. Because if you're not with this family, you're against it. And people who are against this family tend to find their lives becoming very complicated. Is that a threat? It's a promise, Eleanor said. We've built something here that's bigger than your romantic notions about love and honesty. If you can't be part of it, then you need to step aside. And if that little wife of yours is the reason you can't see clearly, then maybe she needs to step aside too. I ripped off the headphones, my heart pounding. They had threatened David directly, and they had threatened me. 6 months before his death, they had made it clear that I was expendable, that my marriage was an obstacle to be removed. I picked up my phone and called Harrison Webb. I need to know something, I said when he answered. David's heart attack. Was it really natural? There was a long pause. The autopsy showed a massive coronary event consistent with the genetic condition that runs in his family. There was no evidence of foul play. But you have doubts. Another pause. I have questions. David was young, healthy, and under the care of an excellent cardiologist who had been monitoring his condition. The timing was convenient for certain family members who had been pressuring him to sign documents he was refusing to sign. What documents? Papers that would have given Richard power of attorney over David's personal assets, not just his share of the family business. David had been refusing to sign them for months. I felt sick. And after he died? Richard tried to claim that as David's next of kin, he should have control over the estate. He was quite angry when he discovered that David had updated his will recently and that I was the executor, not him. They killed him, I whispered. I can't prove that, Harrison said carefully. But I can tell you that David was very worried in the weeks before his death. He called me several times, asking about ways to protect you if something happened to him. He seemed to think he was running out of time. I hung up the phone and sat in the cottage's kitchen, staring out at the forest that surrounded me. David hadn't just been protecting me from his family's greed. He'd been protecting me from his family's willingness to commit murder to get what they wanted. The next morning, I drove back to town for the first time since the will reading. I needed to see how the family was reacting to my disappearance, needed to understand what they were planning next. I parked across the street from the Pemberton Industries building and watched as Richard arrived for work, his face grim and his movements sharp with frustration. My phone rang. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen. Margaret, dear, she said when I answered, her voice dripping with false concern. We've been so worried about you. You disappeared so suddenly after the will reading, and we wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Where are you staying? We'd love to help you get settled somewhere appropriate. I know David's passing has left you in a difficult financial situation. The condescension in her voice made my teeth clench. I'm managing. Of course you are, dear. But we feel responsible for you as David's family. Perhaps we could arrange a small settlement, something to help you get back on your feet. Nothing extravagant, of course, but enough to help you start over somewhere new. Somewhere new. They wanted me gone, wanted me to disappear so they could pretend I had never existed, that David's marriage to me had been a temporary aberration that was now corrected. That's very generous, I said. What did you have in mind? Well, we were thinking perhaps $50,000. Enough for a down payment on a small apartment in another city, maybe some money to help you find work. A fresh start, as it were. $50,000. They were offering me $50,000 to disappear forever, to give up any claim to David's memory or his legacy. It was insulting, but it was also revealing. They were scared enough to offer me money, which meant they suspected David might have left me more than $12. I'll think about it, I said. Wonderful. But Margaret, dear, I do hope you'll think quickly. These sorts of arrangements are easier to make when everyone is feeling generous and cooperative. Delays can sometimes lead to complications. Another threat, delivered with Eleanor's trademark smile in her voice. I was beginning to understand that the Pemberton family spoke in code, that their politeness was just a thin veneer over their willingness to destroy anyone who got in their way. I understand, I said. I'll be in touch soon. I hung up and immediately called Harrison. They just offered me $50,000 to disappear, I told him. Interesting. That's more than I expected them to offer, which means they're more worried than I thought. Have you decided what you want to do? I looked at the Pemberton Industries building, thinking about David working in there every day, surrounded by people who saw him as an obstacle to their criminal enterprise. Thinking about the threats they'd made, the pressure they'd put on him, the stress that might have contributed to his death. I want to meet with them, I said. All of them. I want to hear what they have to say when they think they're about to get rid of me forever. Margaret, that could be dangerous. If they're willing to threaten you, if they might have been involved in David's death, then I need to know for sure, I said. I need to look them in the eye and see what they're really capable of. And I need them to underestimate me just a little bit longer. What are you planning? I thought about the sealed envelope in the cottage safe, the one marked nuclear option. I thought about David's voice on those recordings, the love and protection in every word he'd spoken about me. I thought about the laughter in that conference room, the cruel satisfaction on their faces as they humiliated me. I'm planning to give them exactly what they think they want, I said. And then I'm going to destroy them with it. That evening, I called Eleanor back. I've thought about your offer, I said. I'd like to meet with the family tomorrow to discuss the details. Wonderful, dear. Shall we say 10 o'clock at the office? Actually, I'd prefer somewhere more private. More personal. Could we meet at the family estate? There was a pause. The estate was Eleanor's domain, her seat of power. Meeting there would make her feel completely in control, completely superior. It would also make her careless. Of course, she said finally. I'll have Richard and the others there as well. We can make this a proper family meeting. Perfect, I said. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up and drove back to the cottage, where I spent the evening preparing for the most important performance of my life. Tomorrow, I would walk into the lion's den and convince them that I was the same broken, defeated woman who had fled their laughter 4 days ago. Tomorrow, I would let them think they had won. And then I would show them what David's love had really given me, not just evidence of their crimes, but the strength to use it. The Pemberton estate sat on 50 acres of manicured grounds, a monument to old money and older cruelty. As I drove up the circular driveway the next morning, I felt like I was approaching a fortress designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong. The house itself was a sprawling Georgian mansion with white columns and perfectly symmetrical windows that seemed to stare down at visitors with cold judgment. I parked my modest Honda between Richard's BMW and Eleanor's Mercedes, the contrast making me look exactly as out of place as they wanted me to feel. I'd dressed carefully for this meeting, the same black dress I'd worn to the funeral, my hair pulled back, simply minimal makeup. I wanted to look like the grieving widow they expected, the broken woman who would gratefully accept their charity and disappear. Eleanor answered the door herself, which surprised me. Usually she had staff for such things. Margaret, dear, she said, embracing me with the kind of hug that managed to be both warm and dismissive. You look tired. I hope you've been taking care of yourself. It's been difficult, I said, letting my voice carry just the right amount of exhaustion and defeat. She led me through the marble foyer into what she called the morning room, though it was nearly noon. The space was decorated in shades of cream and gold, with antique furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Richard was already there, standing by the fireplace with a crystal tumbler of what looked like whiskey despite the early hour. Two other family members I barely knew, David's uncle Charles and his cousin Patricia, sat on the silk-upholstered sofa. "Please sit," Eleanor said, gesturing to a chair that was positioned to face the rest of them. The setup was clearly intentional, me alone on one side, them united on the other. "We're so glad you decided to meet with us," Richard said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "We've been genuinely concerned about your welfare." "David would have wanted us to take care of you," Patricia added, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. I nodded, playing my part. "I appreciate that. I know I'm not really family, not in the way that matters to people like you." "Nonsense," Eleanor said, though her tone suggested she agreed completely. "You were David's wife. That makes you family, regardless of background differences." The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Even when they were trying to be kind, they couldn't help but remind me that I didn't belong. "About the settlement," Richard said, getting straight to business. "We've discussed it as a family, and we think 50,000 is quite generous, considering the circumstances." "Considering what circumstances?" I asked, genuinely curious about how they would justify their insulting offer. "Well," Charles spoke up for the first time, David's will was quite clear about his intentions. $12 suggests he wanted to make a statement about the value of your marriage." The words hit like a physical blow, even though I knew the truth now. I let the pain show on my face, let them see how deeply their interpretation wounded me. "I don't understand why he would do that," I whispered. "I thought he loved me." "I'm sure he did, in his way," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but devastating. "But David was always impractical about emotional matters. Perhaps he realized at the end that your marriage was more about what you could gain than what you could give." I stared at her, letting the full impact of her words sink in. They weren't just offering me money to disappear, they were rewriting history, turning my love story with David into a cautionary tale about gold diggers and naive rich men. "The 50,000 would come with certain conditions, of course," Richard continued. "You would need to sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising never to discuss David's personal affairs or family business with anyone. You would also need to agree to change your name back to your maiden name and refrain from using the Pemberton name in any context." "You want me to pretend I was never married to him," I said. "We want you to move on with your life," Patricia said. "Clinging to a name that was never really yours won't help you heal." "Never really mine." I thought about the cottage David had built for me, about the safe full of evidence, about the recordings where he called me the love of his life. But I kept my expression neutral, defeated. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, and something in her tone made me look up sharply. "We've been going through David's personal effects, and we found some things that concern us." My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. "What kind of things?" "Financial records, mostly. It appears David may have been confused about certain business matters in the months before his death. He seems to have been asking questions about transactions that were perfectly legitimate, making copies of documents he had no business copying." Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. "We're worried that his emotional state might have led him to misunderstand normal business practices. If any of those documents were to surface, they could be misinterpreted by people who don't understand how complex financial arrangements work." They knew. Somehow, they knew that David had been gathering evidence against them. My mind raced, trying to figure out how they could have discovered it. "I don't know anything about David's business affairs," I said carefully. "Of course not," Eleanor said. "But if you were to find any papers, any recordings, anything that David might have hidden away, we would need you to bring them to us immediately. For the family's protection, you understand." "And for your own protection," Charles added, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. "People who misunderstand business documents sometimes find themselves in legal trouble. Accusations of corporate espionage, theft of proprietary information, these things can ruin lives." I felt the walls closing in around me. They were offering me money with one hand and threatening me with the other, making it clear that my only safe option was complete surrender. "I understand," I said quietly. "Wonderful," Eleanor said, her smile returning. Then we can have the papers drawn up this afternoon. You can sign them, collect your check, and start your new life. Doesn't that sound lovely? It sounded like a trap. But it also sounded like an opportunity. Actually, I said, there is something I should probably mention. The room went completely silent. Richard's hand tightened around his whiskey glass. What kind of something? Eleanor asked, her voice carefully controlled. David did give me something before he died. Not money, but information. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should use it to protect myself. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia and Charles exchanged glances. Richard set down his glass with deliberate precision. What kind of information? He asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single USB drive, not one of the ones from the safe, but a blank one I'd prepared the night before. I set it on the coffee table between us and watched their faces change. Recordings, I said simply. Conversations David had with family members about business practices. He was worried about some of the things he was being asked to do, so he started documenting everything. Eleanor's face had gone completely white. That's impossible. David would never. Betray the family? I finished. He didn't see it as betrayal. He saw it as protection. He knew that if something happened to him, I would need leverage to keep myself safe. Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You're lying. David was loyal to this family. He would never record private conversations. Wouldn't he? I asked, letting a small smile play at the corners of my mouth. The man who married a woman you all despised? The man who refused to sign your power of attorney documents? The man who started asking uncomfortable questions about where the family money really came from? The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications and threats. I could see them calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much damage I could do. What do you want? Eleanor asked finally, her voice stripped of all pretense. I want what David wanted, I said, standing up and picking up the USB drive. I want to be left alone. I want to live my life without looking over my shoulder, wondering when you're going to decide I'm too much of a threat to tolerate. And in exchange? In exchange, David's recordings stay private. His concerns about family business practices remain between us. And everyone gets to keep living their comfortable lives. Richard's face was flushed with anger. This is blackmail. This is survival, I corrected. You taught me that family is about power, not love. You taught me that everything has a price. You taught me that the only way to protect yourself from people like you is to have something they want more than they want to hurt you. I walked toward the door, then turned back to face them one more time. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it, I said. Tomorrow at noon, I'll call with my decision. Either we make a deal that keeps everyone safe, or I take David's evidence to people who will find it very interesting. Margaret, wait, Eleanor called out, but I was already walking away. I drove back to the cottage with my hands shaking and my heart pounding. I had just declared war on one of the most powerful families in the state, and I had done it with nothing but a blank USB drive and the strength David's love had given me. But as I pulled into the clearing and saw the cottage waiting for me, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the scared, grieving widow who had fled their laughter. I was no longer the woman who believed she deserved their cruelty. I was David's wife, and I was done being afraid. The real war was just beginning. I should have known they wouldn't wait 24 hours. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of car doors slamming outside the cottage. Through the bedroom window, I could see headlights cutting through the darkness, at least 3 vehicles parked in the clearing. My blood turned to ice as I realized how isolated I was, how far from help, how completely vulnerable. I grabbed my phone and tried to call Harrison Webb, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. The cottage's remote location, which had felt like peaceful sanctuary just hours before, now felt like a trap. Heavy footsteps on the front porch. The sound of the door handle being tested. Then Richard's voice, loud enough to carry through the walls. Margaret, we know you're in there. We need to talk. I pulled on jeans and a sweater, my hands shaking as I tried to think clearly. The safe in the basement contained everything, all of David's evidence, all of my leverage. But getting to it would mean going downstairs, and they were already trying to get inside. Margaret. Richard's voice was louder now, more aggressive. Open the door. We're not leaving until we settle this. I crept to the living room window and peered through the curtains. Richard was on the porch with two men I didn't recognize, large, intimidating men who definitely weren't family members. Eleanor stood by one of the cars, talking on her phone. Charles and Patricia were there too, along with someone else I couldn't see clearly in the darkness. They had brought muscle. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, one of the strangers called out. But we're coming in either way. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find, though I knew it would be useless against multiple attackers. My phone still showed no signal, and the landline David had installed was dead. They must have cut the phone lines. The sound of breaking glass came from the back of the cottage. They weren't waiting for me to open the door. I had maybe 30 seconds before they were inside. I ran to the basement stairs, taking them two at a time, and rushed to the hidden safe behind the bookshelf. My fingers fumbled with the combination, 1212, our beginning date, and the safe opened just as I heard heavy footsteps on the floor above me. I grabbed everything I could carry, the USB drives, the most damaging documents, the sealed envelope marked nuclear option, and stuffed them into a backpack I found on a shelf. The sound of voices was getting closer, multiple people searching the cottage room by room. There had to be another way out. David was too careful, too protective to have built me a sanctuary with only one exit. I searched frantically along the basement walls until I found what I was looking for, a narrow door hidden behind a stack of storage boxes. The door opened onto a tunnel that led away from the cottage, probably an old root cellar or storm shelter that David had converted into an escape route. I crawled through it as quietly as I could, hearing the voices above me getting louder and more frustrated as they realized I wasn't in the main part of the house. The tunnel emerged about 50 yards away, hidden by thick undergrowth. I could see the cottage clearly from my hiding spot, could see the lights moving from room to room as they searched for me. My car was still parked in the clearing, but there was no way to reach it without being seen. I was trapped in the forest with nothing but the clothes on my back and a backpack full of evidence that could destroy the Pemberton family if I lived long enough to use it. She's not here, I heard Richard's voice carry across the clearing. But her car is still here, so she can't have gone far. Check the woods, Eleanor's voice replied. She's probably hiding like the coward she is. Flashlight beams started sweeping through the trees around the cottage. I crawled deeper into the undergrowth, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the search party. For the next 3 hours, I played a deadly game of hide and seek in the dark forest. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf could have been one of them getting closer. I moved as quietly as I could, following what seemed like an old deer trail deeper into the woods, away from the cottage and away from any hope of rescue. As dawn broke, I found myself at the edge of a small stream, exhausted and bleeding from dozens of scratches. I could no longer hear voices or see flashlights, but I didn't dare go back. Instead, I followed the stream, hoping it would lead me to a road or a house or anywhere with people who could help me. It was nearly noon when I finally stumbled onto a hiking trail that led to a small parking area. A young couple was just getting out of their car, preparing for a day hike. I must have looked like a disaster, dirty, bleeding, wild-eyed with exhaustion and fear. "Ma'am, are you okay?" the woman asked, rushing toward me. "Do you need help?" "Please," I gasped. "I need to call the police. And a lawyer. People are trying to kill me." They drove me to the nearest town, a small place called Cedar Falls about 20 miles from the cottage. At the police station, I tried to explain what had happened, but I could see the skepticism in the officer's eyes. A family dispute over inheritance money. A widow who claimed she was being threatened by wealthy relatives. No physical evidence of violence, no witnesses, no proof of anything except my own paranoid-sounding story. "We can file a report," the desk sergeant said, but without evidence of actual threats or violence, there's not much we can do. Maybe you should contact a lawyer about the inheritance dispute. I called Harrison Webb from the police station, but his secretary said he was in court all day and couldn't be reached. I left an urgent message, but I had no idea when he would get it or if he would be able to help me. With nowhere else to go, I used the last of my cash to rent a room at a cheap motel on the outskirts of Cedar Falls. The room was dingy and depressing, with stained carpet and a broken air conditioner, but it had a lock on the door and no one knew where I was. I sat on the sagging bed and opened the backpack, spreading David's evidence across the faded bedspread. USB drives full of recordings, financial documents proving fraud and money laundering, correspondence showing bribery and corruption. I had enough evidence to destroy the Pemberton family completely. But I also had nothing. No home, no money, no support system, no way to fight back against people who had unlimited resources, and no moral boundaries. They had driven me from the cottage David had built for me, had turned me into a fugitive in my own life. I picked up the sealed envelope marked Nuclear Option and stared at it. David had warned me to use it only if they pushed me too far, only if I had no other choice. Well, they had just tried to kidnap me in the middle of the night. If that wasn't too far, what was? I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with David's handwriting, along with a small key and what looked like a safety deposit box receipt. The letter was brief. My darling Margaret, if you're reading this, then my family has shown you exactly who they really are. I'm sorry you had to see it, but I'm not sorry you now know the truth. The key opens Safety Deposit Box 247 at First National Bank downtown. Inside that box is a document that will end this war permanently. It's something I discovered by accident, something so devastating that even my family's money and power can't protect them from it. Use it wisely, my love. Use it to build the life you deserve. Forever yours, David. I held the key up to the light, this small piece of metal that apparently held the power to destroy the people who had just tried to destroy me. But First National Bank was back in the city, back in Pemberton territory, back where they would be watching for me. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We have your things from the cottage. If you want them back, and if you want this to end peacefully, meet us tomorrow at noon. Pemberton Industries Building, Conference Room A. Come alone and bring everything you took. They were giving me one last chance to surrender, to hand over David's evidence and disappear quietly. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to take their offer. Give them what they wanted and hope they would honor their promise to leave me alone. But as I sat in that dingy motel room, surrounded by evidence of their crimes, I realized that the scared woman who had fled their laughter was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to hit back harder than they hit you. I had spent my entire life being powerless, being at the mercy of people who thought they were better than me. Foster families who saw me as a burden, employers who treated me as disposable, and finally David's family, who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. But David had given me something they couldn't take away, the truth about who they really were, and the power to use that truth as a weapon. Tomorrow, I would walk into their building one last time. But I wouldn't be walking in as their victim. I would be walking in as their judge, jury, and executioner. The war was about to end, and I was going to win it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the motel room planning every detail of what would happen the next day. By dawn, I had made a decision that would have terrified the woman I used to be, but felt inevitable to the woman I had become. I wasn't going to their meeting empty-handed, and I wasn't going alone. At 8 in the morning, I took a bus back to the city and went straight to First National Bank. The safety deposit box David had left me was in the basement vault, a small metal container that held the final piece of his protection plan. Inside was a single manila folder containing documents that made everything else look like petty crime. Birth certificates, DNA test results, legal papers, and a letter in David's handwriting that explained everything. Richard Pemberton wasn't Eleanor's biological son. The documents told a story that went back 35 years, to when Eleanor was a young woman having an affair with the family's gardener while her husband was away on business. When she became pregnant, she convinced her husband the child was his, and Richard grew up believing he was the rightful heir to the Pemberton fortune. But David had discovered the truth by accident when he found old medical records while helping Eleanor organize her papers after a minor surgery. DNA tests confirmed what the medical records suggested. Richard had no biological claim to the Pemberton name or fortune. More devastating still, the documents showed that Eleanor had been systematically embezzling from the family trust for decades, funneling money into secret accounts to ensure Richard's future, knowing that if the truth ever came out, he would lose everything. David's letter explained his dilemma. I couldn't destroy Richard's life with this information, but I also couldn't let him destroy yours. If something happens to me, if they push you too far, this is the nuclear option. Use it to protect yourself, but remember that using it will destroy more than just Richard. It will destroy the entire family structure they've built their lives around. I sat in the bank's customer lounge, staring at documents that could obliterate the Pemberton family completely. Not just their reputation or their business, but their very identity. Richard would lose his inheritance, his position, his entire sense of self. Eleanor would face criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The family empire would collapse. But I would also be destroying the life of a man who had grown up believing he belonged somewhere, who had never chosen to be part of his mother's deception. Richard was cruel and entitled, but he was also a victim of Eleanor's lies. This was the impossible choice David had left me, complete victory that required destroying an innocent man's life, or continued vulnerability that might cost me my own. I made copies of everything and put the originals back in the safety deposit box. Then I walked to the offices of the city's largest newspaper and asked to speak with their investigative reporter. Sarah Martinez was a woman about my age with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking down corrupt politicians and business leaders. I sat in her cluttered office and laid out the entire story: David's death, the family's threats, the evidence of their crimes, and finally, the nuclear option. "This is incredible," she said, flipping through copies of the financial documents. "If even half of this is true, it's the biggest corruption story this city has seen in decades." "It's all true," I said. "But I need your help with something. I'm meeting with them in 2 hours, and I want you there." "As a witness?" "As insurance. They think I'm coming alone to surrender. Instead, I'm coming with a reporter who already has copies of everything. If something happens to me, if I disappear or have an accident, you publish everything." Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You're playing a very dangerous game with very dangerous people." "They started this game," I said. "I'm just finishing it." At 11:30, Sarah and I walked into the Pemberton Industries building together. The receptionist looked confused when I announced that I was there for the meeting in conference room A and that I was bringing a guest. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Pemberton specified that you were to come alone," she said. "Mr. Pemberton doesn't get to specify anything anymore," I replied. "Tell him Margaret Moore is here with Sarah Martinez from the Herald, and we're coming up whether he likes it or not." The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending to my own execution, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. Conference room A was the same room where they had humiliated me a week ago, but everything felt different now. Richard, Eleanor, Charles, and Patricia were all there, along with 2 men in expensive suits who were obviously lawyers. They looked confident, prepared to accept my surrender and move on with their lives. Their expressions changed when Sarah walked in behind me. "What is this?" Richard demanded. "We agreed you would come alone." "You agreed," I said, taking a seat at the head of the conference table, the power position. "I never agreed to anything." "Sarah Martinez, meet the Pemberton family." Sarah is an investigative reporter with the Herald, and she's here to witness our conversation. Eleanor's face had gone pale. "Margaret, this is highly inappropriate. Family matters should remain private." "Family matters, yes," I agreed. "But criminal matters are public interest." "Sarah, would you like to record this conversation?" Sarah pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the table. Absolutely. The lawyers started whispering urgently to Richard, but I held up my hand for silence. Before anyone says anything they might regret, I said, let me explain how this is going to work. I have evidence of massive fraud, money laundering, bribery, and embezzlement committed by this family over the past 15 years. Sarah has copies of everything. If I walk out of this room safely and unharmed, if I'm left alone to live my life in peace, then that evidence stays private. And if not? Richard asked, his voice tight with controlled rage. If not, then tomorrow's headline will be Pemberton Industries, a criminal empire built on fraud. Your business will be destroyed, your assets will be frozen, and you'll all be facing federal charges. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see them calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if they could still intimidate me into backing down. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out a copy of the DNA test results. Something that will interest you particularly, Richard. I slid the document across the table to him. I watched his face change as he read it, watched the color drain from his cheeks as he understood what he was looking at. This is impossible, he whispered. Your mother can explain it to you, I said. Or Sarah can include it in her article. Your choice. Eleanor was staring at the document like it was a poisonous snake. Where did you get this? David left it for me. He found your medical records, Eleanor. He knew about the affair, about the lies, about everything. He also knew about the money you've been stealing to secure Richard's future. Richard looked up from the document, his eyes wild. Mother, tell me this isn't true. Tell me this is some kind of forgery. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. 35 years, Richard said, his voice breaking. 35 years of believing I belonged here, believing I was part of this family, believing I had a right to any of this. You were part of this family, Eleanor said desperately. Biology doesn't matter. You were raised as a Pemberton. You've earned your place here. I've earned nothing, Richard said, standing up abruptly. Everything I have, everything I am, is built on a lie. He looked at me with something that might have been respect. You could have used this to destroy me completely. Why didn't you? Because David wouldn't have wanted that, I said. He didn't hate you, Richard. He just wanted to protect me from you. There's a difference. I stood up and looked around the room at the faces of people who had tried to erase me from David's life, who had threatened me, who had driven me from my home in the middle of the night. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to leave me alone. Completely alone. You're going to stop your criminal activities and find legal ways to run your business. And you're going to live with the knowledge that I have the power to destroy you all, but I'm choosing not to use it. And in return? Eleanor asked. In return, your secrets stay secret. Your family stays together. And you get to keep pretending you're respectable people instead of the criminals you really are. I picked up my bag and headed for the door, Sarah following behind me. Margaret, Richard called out. I turned back to look at him. I'm sorry, he said. For everything. You didn't deserve any of it. No, I agreed. I didn't. But I survived it. And now I'm stronger than all of you. As Sarah and I walked out of the building, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the deep calm that comes from knowing you fought for yourself and won. What happens now? Sarah asked as we reached the sidewalk. I looked back at the Pemberton Industries building, thinking about the broken people I'd left behind, the family built on lies and held together by fear. Now I go home, I said, to the cottage David built for me. And I start living the life he wanted me to have. The war was over. And for the first time in my life, I had 1.3 months later, I was living peacefully at the cottage when Harrison Webb called with news that changed everything. Margaret, you need to see the morning paper, he said, his voice tight with urgency. And then you need to get somewhere safe. I drove into town and bought a copy of the Herald. The headline made my blood run cold. Pemberton heir dies in apparent suicide, family empire in chaos. Richard was dead. According to the article, he had been found in his apartment with a bottle of pills and a note confessing to years of financial crimes. The note also revealed the truth about his parentage, claiming he couldn't live with the shame of his illegitimate birth and stolen inheritance. But I knew Richard. The broken man I'd left in that conference room 3 months ago wasn't suicidal. He was angry. Angry at his mother, angry at the lies, but not ready to give up his life. Someone had decided that a dead Richard was more convenient than a living one who knew too much. My phone rang. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen. "You killed my son," she said without preamble, her voice cold and deadly. "I didn't kill anyone," I replied. "But I think we both know who did." Richard was weak. He was going to destroy everything our family built because of your lies and manipulations. He had to be stopped. The casual admission of murder made my stomach turn. "You killed your own son to protect your secrets?" "I protected my family's legacy. Richard was never really my son anyway. You made sure everyone knew that. He was just a liability that needed to be eliminated." "You're insane." "I'm practical. And now you're the only remaining threat to our stability." Richard's suicide note conveniently blamed you for everything: the blackmail, the threats, the destruction of our family. "The police are very interested in talking to you about your role in driving a troubled young man to take his own life." I felt the walls closing in around me again. Eleanor had turned Richard's death into a weapon against me, painting me as the villain who had destroyed an innocent family with lies and extortion. "The evidence I have proves your crimes," I said. "What evidence?" "Richard's suicide note explains that he fabricated all of those documents to frame us for crimes we never committed. He was mentally unstable, consumed with guilt over his illegitimate birth, desperate to blame someone else for his problems." Very sad, really. She had thought of everything. With Richard dead, she could claim that all of David's evidence was fabricated by a disturbed man seeking revenge. My word against hers, and she had the resources to make sure her version of events became the official truth. "You won't get away with this," I said. "I already have. The police will be at your cottage within the hour. I suggest you use that time wisely." The line went dead. I sat in my car outside the newspaper office, my hands shaking as I realized how completely I'd been outmaneuvered. Eleanor had sacrificed her own son to eliminate both Richard and me as threats. She was willing to destroy everything to maintain her power. But she had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I would run. Instead, I drove straight to the police station and asked to speak with Detective Morrison, the officer investigating Richard's death. I walked into his office carrying a briefcase full of evidence and a story that would change everything. "Detective Morrison, my name is Margaret Moore Pemberton, and I believe you're looking for me in connection with Richard Pemberton's death." He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and the look of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. "Mrs. Pemberton, you're not under arrest, but I do have some questions about your relationship with the deceased." "I'm sure you do. But before you ask them, I need to show you something that will change your entire understanding of this case." I opened the briefcase and pulled out the original documents from David's safe, not copies, but the originals with dates, signatures, and authentication that proved they couldn't have been fabricated by Richard. "These documents show 15 years of criminal activity by the Pemberton family," I said. "Money laundering, fraud, bribery, embezzlement. Richard didn't fabricate them. My late husband David collected them as evidence before his death." Detective Morrison examined the documents carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. "These are dated going back years. If Richard fabricated them, he would have had to start when he was barely out of college." "Exactly. And there's more." I pulled out the USB drives containing David's recordings. Audio evidence of the family discussing their criminal activities, recorded by my husband before his death 6 months ago. I played him selected excerpts: Eleanor discussing the embezzlement, Richard talking about bribing city officials, Charles planning to launder money through fake charitable donations. The detective's face grew darker with each revelation. "Mrs. Pemberton, if this evidence is authentic, we're looking at a massive criminal conspiracy spanning decades." "It's authentic. And there's something else you need to know about Richard's death." I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of my conversation with Eleanor that morning. Her voice filled the room, cold and clear as she admitted to killing her own son. Richard was weak. He was going to destroy everything our family built. He had to be stopped. Detective Morrison sat back in his chair, staring at me. You recorded this conversation? This morning. Eleanor Pemberton confessed to murdering her son and framing me for his death. She's been planning this for months, waiting for the right opportunity to eliminate both Richard and me as threats to her criminal empire. Why didn't you come forward with this evidence sooner? Because I was trying to protect myself without destroying innocent people. But Eleanor Pemberton has proven that there are no innocent people in that family. She killed her own son to protect her secrets. She needs to be stopped. Detective Morrison called in his partner and the district attorney. For the next 4 hours, I walked them through everything: David's death, the will reading, the cottage, the evidence, the threats, Richard's murder, and Eleanor's confession. I gave them copies of everything and authorization to search the cottage for additional evidence. By evening, arrest warrants had been issued for Eleanor Pemberton, Charles Pemberton, and Patricia Pemberton. The FBI was called in to investigate the financial crimes, and the state attorney general announced a full investigation into Pemberton Industries. But Eleanor wasn't finished fighting. The next morning, I woke up at the cottage to find my car tires slashed and a note pinned to my front door: "You should have taken the money and disappeared. Now you'll disappear anyway." I called Detective Morrison, who immediately sent officers to the cottage and arranged for me to stay in protective custody. But as I packed a bag, I realized I was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people control my life. Eleanor wanted a final confrontation? She could have won. I called Sarah Martinez and told her to meet me at the Pemberton estate with a camera crew. Then I called Eleanor directly. "I'm coming to see you," I said. "One last time. Just you and me." "How brave of you," she replied. "Though I should warn you that accidents happen to people who trespass on private property." "No more accidents," I said. "No more mysterious deaths. This ends today, in front of witnesses, with the truth." I drove to the estate with Sarah and her camera crew following behind me. Detective Morrison had wanted to stop me, but I convinced him that this was the only way to get Eleanor to confess on camera, to provide the final evidence needed to ensure she never hurt anyone again. The estate looked different in the afternoon sunlight, smaller somehow, less intimidating. Eleanor was waiting for me on the front steps, dressed in black like she was already in mourning. "Margaret," she said as I approached, "you look well for someone who's about to have a tragic accident." "The only tragedy here is what you've done to your own family," I replied. "You killed your son, Eleanor. Your own child." I protected my legacy. Richard was never really my son anyway. He was a mistake, a moment of weakness that I've been paying for ever since. Sarah's camera was rolling, capturing every word. Eleanor seemed oblivious to the crew filming from the edge of the property. "David loved you," I said. "He tried to protect you, even after he discovered your crimes. He could have exposed you years ago, but he didn't want to destroy his family. David was weak, just like Richard. Just like you. You all think love matters more than power, that feelings matter more than survival. You're wrong." "Am I?" "Because right now, you're alone. Your son is dead by your own hand. Your family is facing criminal charges. Your empire is crumbling. What did your power get you, Eleanor?" For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. She looked around the estate, the manicured grounds, the imposing house, the symbols of wealth and status that had defined her entire life. "I built something here," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I created a legacy that will last generations. You created a lie that killed your own child. That's not a legacy, Eleanor. That's a tragedy." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something break behind her eyes. The mask of control and superiority finally slipped, revealing the desperate, frightened woman underneath. "He was going to destroy everything," she whispered. "Everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed for. I couldn't let that happen. So you murdered him." "I saved him from a life of shame and disgrace. I saved our family from destruction. You destroyed your family to save your reputation. And now you have neither. Police sirens were approaching in the distance. Detective Morrison had been waiting for my signal, and Sarah's live broadcast had provided all the evidence he needed. Eleanor heard the sirens too. She looked at me one last time, her face a mixture of hatred and something that might have been respect. "You won," she said simply. "No," I replied. "David won. Love won. Truth won. I was just the messenger." As the police cars pulled into the circular driveway, I walked away from the Pemberton estate for the last time. Behind me, Eleanor Pemberton was being arrested for the murder of her own son and decades of financial crimes. The war was finally over. And this time, justice had won. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind the cottage, watching the sun set through the trees David had loved so much. The cottage felt different now, not like a hiding place, but like a home. I had added my own touches over the months, a vegetable garden where David had planned to plant one, wind chimes that caught the evening breeze, and a small memorial stone with his name and the words he loved completely. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly once Eleanor's confession was broadcast live. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole for Richard's murder, plus an additional 30 years for the financial crimes. Charles and Patricia received shorter sentences after cooperating with prosecutors, and Pemberton Industries was dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay back the investors and charities they had defrauded. I received a settlement from the estate liquidation, not because I asked for it, but because the court determined that David's legitimate inheritance had been stolen through his family's criminal activities. The amount was substantial enough to secure my future, but more importantly, it felt like vindication. David's love for me had been real, and now the world knew it. Harrison Webb had become more than just my lawyer. He had become a friend. He stopped by the cottage regularly, sometimes for business, but often just to check on me. Today was one of those visits. "You look happy," he said, joining me in the garden with 2 cups of coffee. "I am happy," I realized, surprised by the truth of it. For the first time since David died, I'm actually happy. He would be proud of you, you know. What you did took incredible courage. What I did was survive. David gave me the tools, but I had to choose to use them. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the gathering dusk. Then Harrison cleared his throat in the way that meant he had something important to say. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something David asked me to give you, but only after everything was settled, after you were safe and happy." He handed me an envelope with my name written in David's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter and a small velvet box. "My dearest Margaret," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then you've survived the worst thing I could imagine, losing me and facing my family's cruelty alone. But you didn't just survive, did you? You fought back. You won. You proved that love is stronger than greed, that truth is more powerful than lies, that one person with courage can defeat an entire system built on corruption. I always knew you were stronger than you believed. I saw it the first day we met, when you stood up to that rude customer at the coffee shop even though you were scared of losing your job. I saw it every time you faced my family's condescension with grace and dignity. I saw it in the way you loved me completely, without reservation, even when loving me made your life harder. The ring in this box was my grandmother's, the only member of my family who would have loved you as much as I do. She believed that love was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that lasted. I want you to have it, not as a symbol of what we lost, but as a promise of what you've gained. You are free now, my darling. Free from my family's hatred, free from their power over you, free to build whatever life makes you happy. Don't spend that freedom mourning what we lost. Spend it celebrating what we had and what you've become. Love someone again when you're ready. Have the children we dreamed about. Build the life we planned, even if you have to build it with someone else. I want you to be happy more than I want you to remember me. But know this, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. You made me a better man, a braver man, a man who knew what it meant to be truly loved. That gift will last forever, no matter what else changes. Live, Margaret. Live fully and fearlessly and joyfully. That's all I ever wanted for you. Forever yours, David. I was crying by the time I finished reading, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. I opened the velvet box to find a simple but beautiful ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant and timeless. He bought that ring 2 weeks before he died, Harrison said softly. He was planning to give it to you for your 5th anniversary, along with the cottage. He said he wanted to renew your vows somewhere that was truly yours, away from his family's influence. I slipped the ring onto my right hand, where it caught the last rays of sunlight. It felt like a blessing, like David's final gift of love and freedom. There's something else, Harrison continued. David set up a foundation in your name, funded by his personal investments that were separate from the family business. It's designed to help women who are trying to escape abusive situations, to give them the resources and support they need to build new lives. A foundation? The Margaret Moore Foundation for Women's Independence. You're the director, if you want to be. David thought you might want to help other women find the strength you found. I looked around the cottage, thinking about the scared, broken woman who had arrived here 6 months ago and the strong, confident woman I had become. David had given me more than evidence and protection. He had given me the chance to discover who I really was when I wasn't afraid. I'd like that, I said. I'd like to help other women find their strength. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the foundation work. We helped women escape domestic violence, provided legal support for those fighting unfair divorces, and offered financial assistance to women starting over after leaving abusive relationships. Each woman I helped felt like a small victory, a way of honoring what David had done for me by doing the same for others. But the most unexpected development came 3 months later, when Sarah Martinez called with news that would change everything again. Margaret, you need to see this, she said, her voice excited. I've been investigating the Pemberton family's business connections, and I found something incredible. She arrived at the cottage that evening with a thick folder of documents and a laptop full of financial records. The Pemberton family wasn't just running their own criminal enterprise, she explained. They were part of a much larger network of wealthy families who have been manipulating local politics and business for decades. Eleanor's arrest has caused other families to panic, and they're starting to turn on each other. She showed me evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond the Pembertons, judges who had been bought, politicians who had been bribed, business deals that had been rigged to benefit a small group of wealthy families at the expense of everyone else. This could be the biggest corruption scandal in the state's history, Sarah said. But I need someone on the inside, someone who understands how these families operate, someone they would never suspect. You want me to go undercover? I want you to use your foundation as cover to investigate other wealthy families who might be involved in similar crimes. You have credibility now, respect in the community. People would talk to you, trust you in ways they would never trust a reporter. I thought about David's letter, about his encouragement to live fully and fearlessly. I thought about the women I was already helping through the foundation, and all the women who might be helped if we could expose and stop the entire network of corruption. It would be dangerous, I said. Extremely dangerous. These people have already proven they're willing to kill to protect their secrets. But it would also be justice. Real justice, not just for David and me, but for everyone who's been hurt by these families' greed and corruption. Sarah nodded. That's exactly what it would be. I looked around the cottage one more time, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I had been a victim, powerless and afraid. Now I was being asked to become something more, an agent of justice, a force for change, a woman who could use her hard-won strength to protect others. When do we start? I asked. Sarah smiled. Tomorrow. There's a charity gala next week hosted by the Blackwood family. They're one of the families I suspect of being involved in the conspiracy. Your foundation received an invitation, apparently. They want to show their support for women's causes. How ironic, isn't it? Margaret Moore, the woman who destroyed the Pembertons, walking into another family's stronghold to bring them down too. They'll never see it coming. As Sarah left that night, I sat in the cottage David had built for me and thought about the future. I had found peace here, had healed from the trauma of losing him and fighting his family. But peace wasn't the same as purpose, and I was beginning to understand that my real purpose was just beginning. I picked up my phone and called Harrison Webb. Harrison, it's Margaret. I need to ask you something. If I were to expand the Foundation's work, if I were to take on some bigger challenges, would you be willing to help? What kind of bigger challenges? The kind that might change everything. There was a pause, then Harrison's familiar chuckle. Margaret, I've learned never to bet against you. Whatever you're planning, count me in. I hung up the phone and walked out onto the cottage's front porch, looking up at the stars David and I used to watch together. Somewhere out there, other women were trapped in situations like mine had been, powerless against people who thought money and status made them untouchable. But they were wrong. I had learned that love was stronger than greed, that truth was more powerful than lies, and that one person with courage could change everything. The Pemberton family had been just the beginning. Tomorrow, I would start planning the next battle in a war I was only beginning to understand. But tonight, I would sit in the home David had built for me and remember that I was no longer the scared, powerless woman who had inherited $12. I was Margaret Moore, and I was just getting started. Hey everyone! Thank you so much for staying with me through this incredible journey. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power we all have to fight back against injustice, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over yet. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to find strength you didn't know you had? Have you ever had to stand up to people who thought they were more powerful than you? Your stories matter, and they inspire others who might be facing their own impossible battles. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because Margaret's story isn't over, and neither are the stories of all the other people out there who are fighting for justice, for love, for the right to live their lives on their own terms. Until next time, remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more powerful than anyone who tries to make you feel small. Keep fighting, keep believing, and keep writing your own story. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.